Well, hello, my friends. It is great to be with you, and it is great to be. Both are true. I'm Dennis Prager, and I thank you. The first hour, I'm not going to repeat. If you can't listen to or want to ever hear or didn't or missed an hour, for $5 miserable bucks a month, you can get any show you want of mine anytime you want and without commercials. It's called Pragertopia. If you like the show, I am puzzled as to why you wouldn't do it. I even bought my producer a gift. It was an honor. An honor. He was debating, he looked at his family budget. He spoke to Susie, his wife. Can we handle $5 a month? And they decided it would be humiliating if I paid for it. That's right. Okay. I got the message. There we go. I'll tune out for a moment. I'll go to the men's room, and you keep doing the coins. All right, anyway, it's Pragertopia.com. Walter Williams, who's really a terrific thinker. He's a professor at Mason. What is it? Just Mason University? George Mason? What is the title? Yeah. George Mason, yeah. Major economist, conservative thinker. The real reasons we have mass shootings from the Daily Signal. The vision that sees easy availability as the problem ignores the fact of U.S. history that guns were far more available yesteryear. I always wonder about that. Why are there shootings now like this, much more than in the past, but there are more gun laws today? Not. Yes. With truly easy gun availability, there was nowhere near the gun mayhem and murder that we see today. Why isn't that a legitimate question, oh ye anti-NRA people? What about the calls for bans on the AR-15, so-called assault rifle? It turns out that according to 2016 FBI statistics, rifles accounted for, this is mind-blowing. Are you ready? There were 17,250 homicides in the U.S. in 2016. 368 of them were rifles. That means restrictions on the purchase of rifles would do little or nothing for the homicide rate. Gun ownership is not our problem. Our problem is a widespread decline in moral values that has nothing to do with guns. That decline includes disrespect for those in authority. That's what I talked about yesterday. I'm going to talk about fear of authority in the next hour. Disrespect for oneself, little accountability for antisocial behavior, and a scuttling of religious teachings that reinforced moral values. Do I want to hug Walter Williams, or do I want to hug Walter Williams? Which one is it, A or B? Vote. Both. Back in a moment. Great song and great video. You should see that. It's so logical. It overturns the entire left-wing equation of political power with empowering the individuals of the group that has the political power. Let's get more blacks into offices, and let's get more women. What will it do for blacks? What did it do for blacks? There are almost no Asians outside of Hawaii in offices in the United States, and they're the most successful ethnic group in the U.S. What does one have to do with the other? It doesn't have anything to do with the other. What it does is it fools you into thinking, oh, wow, now we have power. No, you don't have power. Those individuals have power, and they love it. It's a very big problem of politicians. Are you in it for idealistic reasons or because you love power? That's the big issue. Incidentally, my belief is that Donald Trump, first and foremost, loves the United States more than he loves the power of the office. That's my read, with all his flaws. See my column today, Adultery, Morality, and Trump. Back to Walter Williams. He asks another question you never hear asked. It's like the question, here's another question. Why, in an era of much more racism in America, the 1930s, let's say, 1940s, were there so few blacks born to unmarried women? And today, about 80% are, 8 out of 10. 8 out of 10. With much less racism. Why, when there were far fewer gun laws, were there far fewer mass shootings? Maybe values are an issue, Walter Williams writes. Who, did I mention, happens to be black? Is there one black left-wing thinker who is worthy of reading? When I think of Keith Richburg, who's not even on the right, he's in the center, and I think of how his book, Out of America, one of the most brilliant books of the last, 30 years. Is that book on my it should be. My wife just read it and was reading me parts, and I had him on the show. Let's have him on the show again. Keith Richburg is a distinguished Washington Post foreign correspondent. After spending 3 years in Africa as the head of the Washington Post Africa Bureau, he wrote a book whose thesis is essentially, when I see the state of Africa, I am grateful to having been born in America. There's a black man, of course. And therefore, I am grateful to my ancestors. I don't justify their suffering. I don't justify slavery, needless to say, he doesn't. But I am grateful that they came to the United States of America. I quoted him last week in my column, The Luckiest Jews, Blacks, and Hispanics. That's what it was called. They live in America. How many kids in high school hear that? How many kids at Harvard, history majors, how many American history majors at Harvard know that far more blacks have come to the United States as voluntary immigrants from Africa than came to the United States as slaves? How many? 0. That's my assumption, 0. They talk about lies. Gun ownership is not our problem, he writes. Our problem is a widespread decline in moral values that has nothing to do with guns. If any of our great-grandparents or even grandparents who passed away before 1960 were to return, they would not believe the kind of personal behavior all too common today. They wouldn't believe that youngsters could get away with cursing and assaulting teachers. Remember we talked about that yesterday? They wouldn't believe that some school districts, such as Philadelphia's, employ more than 400 school police officers. Nah, but it has nothing to do with decline of religion. Nothing. You can never mention that as a cause of any social problems. During my primary and secondary schooling from 1942 to 1954, the only time one saw a policeman in school was during an assembly period where we had to listen to a boring lecture on safety. Our ancestors also wouldn't believe we're now debating whether teachers should be armed. I gave a talk, by the way. I'm sure it's at the Prager store. It's really good. I gave it once only. What would our grandparents think? Or something to that effect. It's a powerful talk. There's one moral failing that is devastating to the future of our nation. That failing, which is a wide acceptance by the American people, is the idea that Congress has the authority to forcibly use one American to serve the purposes of another American. That is nothing less than legalized theft and accounts for roughly 3/4 of federal spending. I've said that all the time. It's legalized theft. I don't know why people see it as anything else. People who pay no taxes vote that the living martyr pays half his money away, gives half his money away to them. That's cool. Why is that not theft? Legalized theft. Of course it's legalized theft. For the Christians among us, no kidding, I didn't know he's a Christian. Makes perfect sense. We should consider that when God gave Moses the commandment, thou shalt not steal, he probably didn't mean thou shalt not steal unless you get a majority vote in the Congress. I love him. I do. I love this guy. That's Walter Williams. I mentioned in passing just for a moment that, no, I don't know. I didn't mention. Did I mention the Libertarian article? Have you seen that? Earlier this month, a Libertarian candidate in Pennsylvania's 18th Congressional District drew 1,379 votes, which handed the election to Democrat Connor Lamb, who won by 627 votes. Good job, writes Ed Ring in American Greatness. That should be well publicized. What do you think, Libertarian Party? What do you think? Are you proud of yourselves? A libertarian vote is a vote to feel good about yourself. As I have gotten older, the more I realize how much people do to feel good about themselves, never asking, does it do good? We shall return in a moment. 1-8 Prager 776. It's a big deal. Imagine a commentary on the Bible on a bestseller list. That's my dream. And as I reassure you constantly, I don't even think I should have to. It's sort of, I sort of feel that I have to, but I'm not sure I do. But I make the point frequently, you don't write a Bible commentary on the assumption that you'll get rich. The amount of time that this took in my life, I could have written stuff that would guarantee to sell more, but this is selling very well. People want, that's the whole point. My dream is not only be effective, but will outlive me by 100 years. That's what I wrote it for. Anyway, it's called The Rational Bible. It's coming out next Monday. New York Times, transgender workers gain new protection under court ruling. A federal appeals court rejecting the position of the Trump administration ruled this month that transgender people are protected by a civil rights law that bans workplace discrimination based on sex. What the left does with a law is one of the reasons to pass as few laws governing conduct as possible. That's the civil rights legislation in the 60s was supposed to be one thing, to ban continuing discrimination, legal discrimination against blacks. And now a company cannot say to a man who works for them, please do not wear a dress on the retail floor. Now listen to this. It's very interesting. A private organization that is there to be a conduit of ideas to the world through the internet can ban anything it wants. But a private company, a retail store, doesn't have the right to tell an employee, please don't wear a dress. Get it? It's the upside-down world we live in now. The case was brought by the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EEOC, an independent federal agency on behalf of a funeral director who had been fired by a Michigan funeral home after informing the owner that it's really a he, and there are times when I accept the change, but I want you to understand, otherwise you wouldn't understand the article, that she intended to transition from male to female and would dress as a woman while at work. Job discrimination based on a person's transgender status violates Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the court ruled. Do you think that they had this in mind in 1964? They wouldn't know what you were talking about. Under the law, the ruling said, gender must be irrelevant to employment decisions. The funeral home maintained that it did not violate federal law by requiring the employee to comply with a sex-specific dress code. Moreover, the owner of the home, Thomas Rost, who had been a Christian for more than 65 years, said that forcing him to employ the transgender worker would impose a substantial burden on his sincerely held religious beliefs and would violate another law, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. All right, everybody, Ultimate Issues Hour coming up on the Dennis Prager Show.
Trigger warning, I'm Andrew Klavan, and this is The Andrew Klavan Show. To show you how the adults are, here is a piece from the New York Times, our favorite people from Knucklehead Row. Do we have the Knucklehead Row song? So I saw this article. It came out 2 weeks ago or something, and I kept seeing it around, and the headline was so stupid that I thought it wasn't going to be worth reading except to make fun of. But when I read it, it actually is not a stupid article all the way through. It's really a sad article. It's by a guy named Tim Kreider, who's a teacher, and it's the headline is, "Go ahead, millennials, destroy us." Okay? Go ahead, millennials, destroy us. And he says he's an aging Gen Xer. But listen to what he says, because it's not what you think it is. It's not at first what you think it is. He says, like most people in middle age, I regard young people with suspicion. The young and the young at mind tend to be uncompromising absolutists, and that is exactly right. Why? Because they don't know anything. When you don't know anything, you have to make extrapolations, generalizations from a very small piece of information. You talk to a baby and the baby sees a dog. Baby thinks the dog might be a person. How does he know? Every living thing he's seen talks and interacts with him, but the dog doesn't. He has to learn things before he stops making gigantic generalizations. So the guy says the young and the young at mind tend to be uncompromising absolutists. He goes on, I am creeped out by the increasing dogmatism and intolerance of millennials on the left. I felt a generational divide open up under me last year when everyone under 40 seemed to agree that Dana Schutz's painting of Emmett Till in his coffin should be removed from the Whitney. When I was young, it seemed the natural order of things that conservatives were the prudes and scolds who wanted books banned and exhibitions closed, while we liberals got to be the gadflies and iconoclasts. I know that whenever you disapprove of young people, you're in the wrong because you're going to die and they'll get to write history. But I just can't help noticing that the liberal side isn't much fun to be on anymore. And that's what I'm talking about. Crowder is still funny because Crowder can say whatever he wants and think whatever he wants. He doesn't have to worry about insulting blacks, except on Twitter and YouTube, because that's where they'll ban you for being funny, for being free, That's what they ban you for. They ban you for being free. Okay, so he talks about the left has become puritanical, censorious, grim, humorless, and they shut down speech. I guess that's saying it twice, censorious. They shut down speech, and young people exemplify this. So that's where he starts, all right? And then he says, yet this uprising of the young against the ossified monolithic power of the National Rifle Association has reminded me that the flaws of youth, its ignorance, naivete, and passionate Manichaean idealism are also its strengths. Young people have only just learned that the world is an unfair hierarchy of cruelty and greed, and it still shocks and outrages them. They don't understand how vast and intractable the forces that have shaped this world really are, and still think they can change it. Revolutions have always been driven by the young. This is also true, and revolutions have always, always ended with bloodshed, despair, and slavery. Only one revolution has worked, a revolution of Englishmen against Englishmen. It was actually a civil war, and that's the American Revolution. That's the only one that has improved the lives of the people who revolted. So this is his final word. My message as an aging Gen Xer to millennials and those coming after them is Go get us. Take us down. All those cringing provincials who still think climate change is a hoax, that being transgender is a fad, or that socialism means purges and re-education camps, just because it does. Rid the world of all our outmoded opinions, vestigial prejudices and rotten institutions, gender roles as disfiguring as foot binding, the moribund and vampiric two-party system, the savage theology of capitalism. Rip it all to the ground. I, for one, can't wait till we're gone. I just wish I could live to see the world without us. In other words, he is giving up on adulthood. He is giving up on the Western story. He is giving up on a freedom because he has forgotten what it's for. He has forgotten eudaimonia. He has forgotten life in abundance. He has forgotten joy that only comes through virtue, that only can be found when you are free. He has forgotten what the West is about. And so he's saying, tear it down, tear it down. What does he think will rise up in its stead? What does he think will replace it? They've lost the plot, and so they're calling on the children to destroy them. It's an amazing thing. And by the way, I saw this once before. I lived through the 60s. I saw the children rise up. I saw the adults cede their authority. I saw them say, I saw them bought off by sex. I saw them say, a world in which we can have sex with anyone we want. Good, great, tear down Western civilization. I saw them allow young people to take over the places in college. At least there were college students. At least they'd learned something in life instead of these tots, but it was still the same thing. It was all these kids who did not understand what the West was about. And so they were happy to tear it down. Hey ho, Western Civ has got to go. That's what they used to chant. And the adults gave ground. We should tell these kids to go back to school, sit down, do their homework, and shut up. Trigger warning, I'm Andrew Klavan, and this is The Andrew Klavan Show.
Well, here is a little tiny anecdote that I think I was delighted to uncover. George Soros, the big philanthropist who funds a lot of these anti-fascist groups, he just gave $50,000 to the group called Refuse Fascism, and he poses as a champion of what he calls the open society. Well, I found a very interesting interview that he did with Steve Kroft of CBS News, in which Steve Kroft asks him, he says to Soros, hey, Soros, isn't it true that when you were in your teens, you and another guy were going around your native Hungary, confiscating the property of Jews and turning it over to the Nazi-dominated regime? Soros goes, yes. And isn't it true that you, in a sense, became a collection boy for Hitler? And Soros goes, yes, I admit I did. And then Kroft says, and don't you feel bad now looking back on it, all the stuff you did when you were young? You were young, it's to be sure, but surely you can have regrets as an older man. And Soros goes, and this is the key, I have no regrets. He goes, all that bad stuff was going to happen anyway. And so I merely played my role. I took advantage of it, just like I take advantage of markets. So here is the secret history of George Soros. Notice that he's been able to get away with this. The left knows about all this, but they give him a pass because he's, quote, fighting fascism. No. When you actually look at Soros' history, you actually see a very dark side, which is confirmed not just by what he did then, but the way he feels about it now.
The Blaze Radio Network. On demand. Glenn Beck.
Do you think that the press would care? Do you think the press would point out that it is unethical for the NRA to donate $116,898 to Republican candidates, including half of that to Donald Trump? Right? I mean, here's an organization that has blood on its hands. It would be unethical if they didn't report it. Holy cow. So I can't understand why they're not reporting today that a Planned Parenthood affiliate donated $116,898 to the Democratic candidates and didn't report it. The Wisconsin branch of Planned Parenthood was fined a whopping $5,850 by the Federal Election Commission for failing to report $116,898 in independent expenditures to Hillary Clinton for president and Russ Feingold. Okay, it's fairly obvious why they donate to Feingold, who supports partial birth abortions. And to be clear, partial birth abortions don't involve just dismembering children in the womb, because it's too tight in there to cut them up in the womb right before birth. Partial birth abortion means the baby is pulled through the birth canal and only the head remains, and then they just stick a spike into the head and scramble the brains until the kid is dead. Then the head comes out of the birth canal. So it's one of those beautiful procedures. Feingold has voted 8 times to allow partial birth abortions. The guy's a moneymaker for Planned Parenthood. Of course they're going to support him. The Wisconsin Planned Parenthood affiliate donated $58,449.04 to both Clinton and Feingold. Now, that's not why they're in trouble. In fact, it's quite common for Planned Parenthood affiliates to donate hundreds of thousands of dollars to political causes, which is weird because they're trying to spend that money on mammograms. They're doing everything they can. It's hand them out. The cupboards are bare. They need to have those tax dollars come in because there's no money for these poor women. As affiliates of Planned Parenthood, they're allowed to funnel money into candidates and causes that benefit the operational arm of Planned Parenthood, the now federally funded organization, which performed over 300,000 abortions last year and received $543.7 million in taxpayer subsidies. Can I ask, when did this country stop having the discussion that we will never fund abortions? Do you remember that? We're never going to afford, to support abortions. We will never. It's an outrage to say that this Congress wants to pass a bill that will fund abortions. When did we stop having that argument? When did that just become normal? Planned Parenthood now is in trouble for not reporting the donations as required by law. The distinctions are fraught with legalese and courtroom jargon, which is a large part of the problem. But where does Planned Parenthood stand? More importantly, where is all of that money coming from? By the way, don't bother to find this in the news. It's not there. The mainstream media isn't interested in journalism of this kind. They are far too busy trying to figure out just exactly how many Diet Cokes President Trump is consuming every day.
It's Thursday, April 5th. This is the Glenn Beck Program.
Is it just me, Stu, on that with Planned Parenthood? Do you remember when they would say we're never going to fund abortions in this, and then all of a sudden now we're doing it all the time?
Well, as you know, Glenn, what happens is individual dollars come into Planned Parenthood.
Okay.
And those individual dollars are put inside of a giant vat of money. And what they do when they want to take and pay for an abortion, they reach in there and make sure they avoid those specific dollars. They never even touch one of those dollars that are coming in because, as you know, they are primarily a women's health facility.
Yes,
that facilitates women's health.
Yes.
And so what they do is they just kind of navigate their fingers around the dollars that are set from the government, and they pick up other outside dollars to pay for abortion, even though the overwhelming majority of the reason you would go to Planned Parenthood is going to be to get an abortion, and all of the procedures that must be required to get an abortion, those can all be paid for. But not the actual abortion, which is supposed to make you feel so good and so excited to send in your dollars every April 15th.
All right, good. Okay, because that's not happening for me. I'm not feeling good about it.
You're not?
No, I'm not.
You're not feeling charitable when you're paying for other
No, I actually feel ripped off.
But these are associated procedures with abortion, but not actual abortion.
It's weird. I pay 10% to my church. And I know exactly where my church is spending that. You know, I can follow the dollars. I see what the percentage is on how much actually went to that particular problem that they were trying to solve.
Sure.
I know how much money is going to food and clothing and housing people all around the world. So I give my 10% to my church, and I'm happy to do it because it's very efficient. If there's one thing the Mormons are good at, efficiency. So it's very efficient, and so I have no problem doing that, and I can check at any time. And you know what? If they became wasteful, I would still give 10%, but I wouldn't give it to them.
Well, sure.
I would be a good steward of this money. But see, when it comes to April 15th, I have no idea where this money is going. They're buying turtle tunnels, doing all kinds of stuff, wasting, paying off litigation. You know, for #MeToo, for scumbags that are in Congress. I really don't want to pay for all of that stuff.
Well, your approach seems boring.
What?
I mean, like if you went to a movie theater and it's The Sixth Sense, and the first scene it says, by the way, Bruce Willis
is dead
the whole time.
Yeah.
Now The Sixth Sense. That would suck. You go to when you donate to your church, it's going to go to a good cause and they're actually going to use it efficiently. That's boring. Here is like you get an M. Night Shyamalan twist. They tell you it's not going to abortion, but it actually is. At the end.
Gosh,
at
you're
the end,
right.
You're like, oh my gosh, I didn't know the whole time.
So I've been
funding that.
It's like the fun and the exhilaration of going to Vegas.
Okay, yeah.
It could do good, but it probably is going to the mob.
And even if it's going to do some good, it's going to do it really inefficiently.
I like that.
Yeah, it's a really fun way to do business. We should give the government more of our money and more power so they can do that to us more often.
Only if they take away my guns.
I hate, God, their guns are so bad.
Only if they take away my guns.
Bad. You know, I want everyone to know that Trump is a fascist, but please have him take our guns immediately because it turns out really well when you're a resist movement, right? You're saying you're resistance. Let's use the word resistance.
Let's use the word that they're using now, not just resistance, revolution.
Revolution.
You know, that member of Congress said, I think it's time for the revolution. So the best thing you can do if you're for revolution is take away all the guns.
I was going in a slightly different direction when it comes to our absolutely incredibly sarcastic points we're making.
Sure, I'm not being sarcastic. I believe every word of this.
Which is, if you have a fascist government and you consider yourself to be the resistance, think of how ineffective that resistance would be if you actually were to give the fascist government all of your weapons. This is not an advisable action in this particular circumstance. It's almost as if they don't actually believe the government is fascist, because if they did, you wouldn't think that immediately turning your weapons over to that fascist government would be advisable.
Unless they're all French and they're like, no way we could win anyway. And which is really weird. People say all the time, I can't believe what you're going to fight against the United States government.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know. Al Qaeda was doing pretty good.
We have to take that point down because gets repeated.
ISIS did pretty good.
This gets repeated all the time.
Palestinians seem to be holding up.
What are you going to do with your AR-15 against the government? They have tanks. And what that is designed to do is to make you picture in your head tanks rolling up your driveway and you standing there by yourself with your AR-15, okay? And it's a very successful idea. Now, again, we hope it never comes to this, but this is what the founders wanted to protect against. They didn't want a tyrannical government, so they put the Second Amendment in largely for that purpose, okay? So the idea that you have your AR-15 and tanks roll up your driveway, yes, you're going to lose that battle. However, think about it from the other perspective. Think about a government who wants to institute tyranny over its people.
Oh, boy.
Okay, let's just say they want to do that.
Listen to where he's going.
Okay? Think about the logistical challenge of rolling over 350 million guns, okay? Trying to go door to door to stop an armed populace who is resisting you that has 350 million guns. Yeah, you know what? You could nuke all the cities. Oh, they've got nukes. Yeah, you could nuke all the cities. And in the end, I guess you'd win that battle. What country are you running at that point, though? What have you done to the nation you supposedly want to have tyranny over? There's nothing left to run. You've killed everyone, and there's no infrastructure anywhere, and there's no economy, and there's nothing going on. if you try to go door to door, I can tell you it's pretty difficult. And you know how I can tell you it's pretty difficult? Because I got that information from the same people who told us it was going to be impossible to win a war in Iraq with the U.S. military going door to door against the Iraqi people. You are the people who told us it was going to be impossible to go door to door in Iraq. And it was really freaking hard. They didn't even have AR-15s, most of them. They didn't have the Second Amendment. They didn't have 350 million guns. And the U.S. military went in there and still had a lot of problems. So this idea that having a self-defense mechanism against the government is meaningless, it's not. You're right. Tanks rolling up your driveway, you're going to have a real tough time with your gun. However, it is a real deterrent over even attempting this. Why would you even bother? It would be so difficult. You'd lose so many lives. You'd have such a destroyed society by the end of it. It wouldn't be worth it.
I'm really sorry, Stu. I tried to bring up something that maybe you'd be a little passionate about. I'm sorry I missed the mark. There's nothing like having a conversation with a friend and you just say one thing and then they go off. And it's just like, wow, it's the 4th of July. Look at these fireworks. This is fun.
Glenn Beck.
Last year, Mercury One had their leadership program hosted by David Barton and Mercury One. It's 2 weeks of you coming in or sending your kids, and David really putting them through school in a leadership program. The first session starts May 28th, second is June 11th, and then the third is July 9th. They each last 2 weeks. We're looking for 18 to 25-year-olds. You're going to learn about our country, and you'll see the original documents. You'll learn how to research. I just heard a story last night of one of the people that attended last year. They wrote a paper, and I can't remember what it was on. It was like John Adams and slavery, and the professor said, no, you don't want to do that. And she said, yes, I do. He said, no, you really don't. She said, yes, I do. When she wrote the paper and turned it in, not knowing what kind of grade she was going to get, she passed with flying colors with an A, and the professor said, I had to look some of this stuff up. I didn't even know if that was true or not. It was the best, well-researched paper I've ever read. Leadership program, mercury1.org/LTP. Apply now.
Glenn Beck, Mercury. This is the Glenn Beck Program.
I posted something last week on Twitter, and I normally don't talk about this stuff, but I think this is kind of important. The leader of my church died last week, and he was truly a remarkable man. And the reason why I want to bring this up is because the New York Times ran an obituary that is so offensive. What is an obituary? What is it? It's to explain somebody's life. The obituary is to say, this is who this person was. The New York Times ran an obituary that said Thomas Monson, the president of the Mormon Church, who rebuffed demands to ordain women as priests and refused to alter church opposition to same-sex marriage, died Tuesday at 90. Is that who he was? Is that who he was? And why did he deny those things? Beck and Adams did a really good article on how the New York Times writes their obituaries. And He used the obituary of Thomas Monson last week and compared it to the New York Times obituary of Fidel Castro. Hugh Hefner really didn't talk about, what Hugh Hefner did and the rapes and the horrible things that happened at the Playboy Mansion. Didn't mention any of that. Hefner created Playboy magazine and spun it into a media and entertainment industry giant. Doesn't seem like there's any controversy there. How about Fidel Castro? Fidel Castro, Cuban revolutionary who defied U.S., dies at 90. Okay, headline. Here's the obituary. Fidel Castro, the fiery apostle of revolution, who brought the Cold War to the Western Hemisphere in 1959 and then defied the United States for nearly half a century as Cuba's maximum leader, bedeviling 11 American presidents and briefly pushing the world to the brink of nuclear war, died on Friday. It continued, claiming the Castro era was one of medical advances. Excuse me? He improved education and health care for many Cubans. Admirers from around the world, including some Americans, were impressed with the way that health care and literacy in Cuba had improved. Okay. How about the 78,000 people that died trying to flee him? How about that one? How about the 5,300 known to have lost their lives fighting against communism? How about that one? Thomas S. Monson, who is the president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints since 2008, enlarged the ranks of female missionaries, but rebuffed demands to ordain women as priests and refused to alter church opposition to same-sex marriage, died on Tuesday at his home in Salt Lake City. He was 90. I'm tired of the bigotry on all people of faith, no matter what faith it is. I'm tired of it. Let me tell you who Thomas Monson was. Thomas Monson was a man that served people over himself and really over institutions. There are many stories of him going to some important thing where he's going to be, the main guy that everybody wants to see. And he doesn't show up because halfway there, he found out that there was a woman whose husband had died, was at the hospital and alone. Somebody who was dying themselves that didn't have anybody to hold their hand through the process. He put nothing in front of people. Nothing. I met him once. He was not impressed. I was at a room. It was for a funeral. And my friend's daughter had died. And Thomas Monson walked in, and this was a important funeral. Anybody was there. It was a room full of senators and congressmen, and I think the governor was there. Everybody was there. And before the funeral, we all met in this room with the casket, and it was open. And everybody knew Thomas Monson in this group except me. And so everybody was like, "Oh, have you met the president of the church?" I said, "No." "Oh, you got to meet him. He's such a great guy, blah, blah, blah." So everybody kind of was like, besides the funeral, it was a big moment for us to meet him. And I stood there with my wife. And he came in and he just said hi quickly to everybody. There was no glad handling at all of anybody. And then he came up to me and he looked me in the eye and he said, "Nice to meet you." But it was so brief because standing next to my wife were these children. And they were probably 6, 7, 8 years old. Here's this 87-year-old man. He just looks at me and gives me a quick handshake. "Nice to meet you." And he's not even finished with "nice to meet you" or me saying "nice to meet you." And he's looking at these children, and he gets down on one knee, and he begins to talk to these children. His whole countenance changed. And he got down on his knees so he was eye level with them. And he said, "How are you doing? What's happening? So what do you want to do when you grow up? What's going to happen here?" And he talked to children in a way that I had never heard before. And I thought to myself, he is childlike. He can work in this world, but he has not lost that. He was more interested in the children than he was of anybody important. Then he stood up and he took my friend by the hand and he stood in front of the coffin and I listened to him. And he comforted my friend in a way I have never heard before. He talked about her beauty and her soul, and how her pain was over. And he spoke with such a surety that I knew he knew where she was. Shame on the New York Times. An obituary is to tell us who that person was. You focused on the political. Shame on you. And to those who loved Thomas Monson as I did, happy day. He is finally reunited with his wife. And there was a celebration, as there will be, hopefully, when all of us return. There was a celebration. He is home, and I know it, because I know he returned to his Father in heaven like a child.
Glenn Beck.
The Blaze Radio Network.